Welcome to the Zoom walk round Woodley. Funnily enough, some time ago, walk leaders decided to reduce the number of people from 20 to 15, and now we've got about 60, so it's going to be an interesting walk. A few words about this walk before we actually get going. It's unlike the ones I've been involved with so far for several reasons. The Ewelme and Dorchester walks were initiated in mostly Sally's work, and they were new walks with no previous chosen route or photos or research. In this case, all I've done is steal somebody else's work and Zoomified it. In 2019, I joined the Woodley project, more about that later, and in August started to collaborate with Leslie and Sheila and Anne to help record the research of this walk and create a document giving places of interest and the route directions and make a map of the route. And in September 2019, the walk was led for the first time. Here's Leslie's description of her reason for the walk. When we moved to Woodley in 1983, we thought this was a 1960s built suburb within easy reach of Heathrow, which was where our office was based. Bringing up a family and work left little time to investigate, but when I retired and joined Woking U3A, an opportunity arose to do further study. From this and my connection with the Walking into History group, in the spring of 2019, I started working on a walk which is include as much of historical Woodley as possible. I approached Pauline Needham, a friend of mine, and she was happy to share her notes with me on walks that she devised over the years. She had mainly used these two books, Woodley in the 19th Century by Francis Lloyd and The Woodley Album by Elizabeth M. Simmons as the basis for her research. Now a bit more about the Woodley project. Let me just switch over here. This is a U3A shared learning project set up in 2018 by Anne Smith with members predominantly from Reading and Wokingham U3As. The then Woodley and District U3A was formed in June 2019, and of course, some of its members also joined in. And Deborah Mander, the Woodley Town Clerk, was enthusiastic and attended most of the meetings. She had previously researched Woodley in World War I, and she's behind the display boards in the Oakwood Centre. More about that later. She also offered us the chance to publish our research on the Woodley Town Council website. And here's a list of the project's work on that website, so have a look sometime. Woodley Walks, the first one, that's what we're doing now, roughly speaking. And of course, as well as these, there's other things going on. There's people working on street names, prehistory, and Anne also plans to make all this work into a book. Now let's get going. Here's a map of the route. So it's about 4.5 miles. It's pretty flat and it's all on pavements and good roads. But of course, as far as you're concerned, it means sitting down for about an hour and a bit longer, probably. If you don't know much about Woodley, there's two roads here going north, up here and up there, up to the A4 at Sonning. And there's two roads here going south, down to Loddon Bridge. And there's a road going off here to the west to Reading. Our walk begins here on Church Road at the Bull and Chequers pub. You can see we do a series of 3 loops. Starting here, going round this one first, and along here to the town centre, which is here. A second one up here, up and back, around and down here. A third one down to the south, west, down here, up here, and back to where we started. Why not one over here? Well, because it's fairly boring. This is all mostly newish housing. There's nothing very exciting there. We'll have a short recap of the route after we finish this first big loop around there, because it's a bit longer than the rest. So we'll go back in time first and look at some old maps and see how things have changed. Now, 1898. This is meant to be Woodley. Here's the town centre. Oops. There's practically nothing here. Over here, there's just woods and lakes, and there's a pub here, the Chequers. There's a pub here, the Bull and Chequers. There's a church. There's a smithy over there. The rest is mostly just sort of isolated farms scattered around. The only significant housing we can see is over here in Woodley Green, this little bit here at the very end, called Cobblers City. The school is in its original place, which is up here next to the church. The Bull and Chequers, the Chequers we've seen, there are two pubs there and there for only about 10 houses, but in those days, a ratio of one pub to every 10 houses is pretty normal. I'll tell you more about all of these places, obviously, later on as we carry on. So let's move on now to 1912. Now we're beginning to get a little bit of development here. Up the Reading Road, up here, this bit, there, up Western Avenue, good number of houses, but that's about all. The church, the school, the farm, Cobblers City, nothing else much at all, really. Nothing much has changed. Now we go on another 20, 30 miles, 20 years. Now it's spread here all the way up this way, all the way down this way, Crockhamwell Road. There's a little bit down here, beginning to build up along here, along Headley Road there. Now, the school is starting up here. There's all sorts of things. So it's now getting a little bit more like what you would expect. Still, I wouldn't call this the town centre, but, you know, things are happening. And over here, where it was just woods and things, they're building little bungalows in this little smart area here. The aerodrome was built in about in the 30s, but it's not yet marked on the map. It's over here. Right, now getting nearer where we can see practically everything we expect. Here's the aerodrome. It was originally known as Woodley Aerodrome, and then Reading Aerodrome during the war, and then eventually reverted to its original name. And we've got buildings all the way down here, and here's the school as well, just here. This is the big secondary school here. So we're going to start off our walk now, which I said is about 4.5 miles. You know, it's not going to take long. We're going to start here, round the block, as far as here. That's part one. So let's go and start at the Bull and Chequers. It's the first of my set of old and new photographs. Here are the old ones, and I'm trying to do these pairs, you know, as and when I can. The pub is listed at grade 2 and is probably the oldest public building still in use in the town. It was used for meetings of the vestry, that was sort of local, you know, government, which through the poor law guardians controlled parish relief and management of the workhouse. And they also appointed constables. In the left photo, you can see just here is a pond, but over here it's turned into a car park. Obviously things have moved on a little bit since then. Now the corresponding new photos. I try and do both old and new when I can, because it's listed, of course. Not much has changed. Here's the left, here's the right, the same, very much the same as we had it before. Now we'll walk further up Church Road. On the right, we can see the Robert Palmer cottages, locally known as the Lay-Lea Cottages. These were the cottages of Miss Lay-Lea and Mr. Burt, around about 1970. Miss Lay-Lea's father was a bricklayer, and her grandfather was a farm labourer in the employ of Roger Palmer. Robert Palmer is fairly well known. In 1970, when she was 86, she was still living in this cottage, and she had a rent book from her grandfather's time, so she'd been there some time. Her father paid 50 shillings rent a year to the Palmer estate. She recalled that as a child, she took this rent money to Sonning, and she was usually given half a crown to take home as a welcome bonus. One of these cottages has been on the market recently, year before last, at offers over £325,000. Now we're going to cross over Church Road to see, you guessed it, the church. This is the Church of St. John. It was endowed by Robert Palmer, here he goes again, of Home Park, Sonning, at a cost of £5,000. Foundation stone was laid in October 1871, and the church was consecrated in 1873. Next door are the original school buildings. They're now used as this bit as the church hall. The school was opened on the 14th of May 1854, nearly 20 years before the actual church was built, on the site of Puck's Farm, where a dame school had operated. In other words, one lady ran a small class for children. At this time, the road was known as Puck's Lane, and in 1879, the building was damaged by fire, and when the repairs were made, an extra classroom was added, and the school bell was placed in the gable. By 1870, they had 56 children. By 1932, it wasn't a village school, it's 107 children. And thereafter, the numbers rose rapidly, necessitating the building of another classroom in the playground, which opened in 1933. Then school numbers dropped in 1939, when the senior school for children over 9 opened on Loddonbridge Road. This became a secondary modern school and is now Rivermead School. Until 1951, when new toilets were built, facilities here were very primitive. Central heating wasn't installed in the main block until 1952. And then all these new housing estates sprang up around Woodley in the 50s and the 60s, so that by 1969, the numbers had increased to 350 again. The school just couldn't take that number, and they finally moved to new premises on the airfield development in 1992 after 137 years on this spot. This part is the church hall. The newer parts were taken over by St. John's Ambulance, and the school's playing field was, guess, sold for housing. We cross over just here to the other side of Church Road and into Church Mews to look at the Old Vicarage. The top photograph of the old pair here is the vicarage, which was built in 1873 and used by 5 consecutive vicars of Woodley. During World War II, it was used as a nursery school to help mothers who were working for the war effort. The lower photo here is the Verger's cottage. And this is where Woodley Library was housed until the new library was built behind the shopping precinct. The new photo over here, that's the vicarage. All this area, known as Woodley Green, became Woodley's only conservation area in 1990. Now we've gone out as far as we're going. We're going to cross over and come back now, but to continue our walk, we need to wiggle through a number of little roads and a footpath to reach Tippings Lane. So we turn off Church Road here into Cornfield Road. We cross Lund Farm Road into Welford Road, and then up Oakdale Walk, and we end up on Tippings Lane. There we turn right, and the next bend it becomes Headley Road East. Headley is a corruption of Hadley Heath, which was once the name for this area. We're now in Cobblers City. If you remember the 1898 map, this was one of the very few built-up areas at the time. Cobblers City was an area for tradesmen, like carpenters and furniture makers. George Aldridge had a bakery, and he also ran the post office. The bakery was famous for its Zilvo flour, which had a secret ingredient. There's no evidence from the censuses that there was ever a cobbler as such here. It's thought the name comes from the expression cobble together, meaning do something quickly or roughly, and refers to the kind of work that people did, or perhaps just the way that the houses were cobbled together. First ones on the right, these ones, these make up St. Luke's Cottages, which were at one time the home of St. Luke's Home for Sick Children from London. It was owned by Miss Dashwood of Sonning, who founded the home in 1880. And then later on, the buildings were used for the Woodley Working Men's Club. Next on the right is the Garfield Cottages, the home of George Pottinger, of whom we'll hear more again at the War Memorial, and the off-licence and the post office. These three houses were built in 1881, when more interest was being taken in providing new houses for workers. They represent the last phase of building in Cobblers City. You can see a pub sign here for the Fountain Inn, Fountain off licence, previously the Red Lion pub. This is now closed, but this is the site of Woodley's oldest shop. If you want to know much more about the history of Woodley's shops, see the project's entry on the Woodley Town Council website, which I mentioned at the beginning. Next along the road are a set of three semi-detached cottages. They're now known as Appletree Cottage, Wishingwell Cottage, and Bluebell Cottage, but they were originally called Appletree Cottage, The Cottage, and End Cottage. These three cottages are the oldest surviving buildings in Cobblers City and couldn't have been built much after the mid-17th century. Now, we leave Cobblers City, walk towards the town centre. On the right, there's some industrial units called Headley Park. Park, how ironic. On the 1938 map, they're marked as allotments. I wouldn't call it a park. Never mind, that's what they call them. On the left, at first, the edge of a large housing estate. And then a little on, further on, these are the industrial units on the left side, on the right side. Headley Road was built when the development of the old Woodley Airfield site began in the 1980s. A little bit about the airfield now. In 1913, a French aviator, Henri Salmet, landed an early aeroplane in a field in Woodley as part of an air circus that was touring the country. Shocked villagers who'd never seen one of these before, as part of they were allowed to sit in the plane, and some of them were taken for flights, including Gladys Aldridge, the daughter of the baker. And in 1929, the aircraft business Phillips and Powys was founded, and two aero clubs. And they started doing air shows held here, and Alan Cobham bought his famous flying circus. It was hugely popular, giving thousands of people their first experience of flying. Douglas Bader had his flying accident here. We all know a little bit about him. I'll just summarise. He'd been forbidden to do low-level flying stunts, but his logbook for that day records, crashed, slow, rolling near ground, bad show. He's taken to the Royal Berks Hospital, but surgeons were unable to save his legs. He was invalided out of the RAF, but managed to get back in later, despite having 2 artificial legs. In 1941, flying over Germany, he was forced to bail out of his plane, but his artificial right leg was trapped, and he was taken a prisoner of war, and arrangements were made to have a replacement leg sent over to him. Even so, he tried had attempts at escaping, so he was transferred to the escape-proof Colditz Castle. His story being the basis of the film, Reach for the Sky. Oh, I should go back and just say a little bit about the airfield, this building here. They started making, first of all, a military plane called the Magister, and by 1937, 800 men were employed. This was used as a trainer for Spitfire and Hurricane pilots. They built this Falcon Hotel to provide accommodation for club members and visitors. And on the top there was the control tower. And then later on, this became a nightclub. And even after much of the existing airfield housing estate was built, this building survived until it was burnt down in the 1980s. And obviously, most people know that there are street names in this development up here to do with the history of the site. They include names of planes like Hurricane Way, Spitfire Way, Viscount Way. Famous aviators, Farman Close, Orville Close, Wright Close. And people or companies who developed aeroplanes like Miles Way, Mitchell Way, Sopwith Close. And of course, Barder Way is the road you normally take if you drive up here from the A329M. So further on the left-hand side, we see a second site of St. Luke's Home. In 1883, this new, a much larger St. Luke's Home for 6 children was built here, replacing the building we saw earlier in Cobblers City. In 1936, it became the clubhouse for Woodley Flying Club and was renamed Hawkhurst. After that, it housed various factories such as Liebers Upholstery, Mr. Harry Shirts. Unfortunately, it was demolished in 2019, just as we started doing research for this walk. And during this war, there's another place along here that did the first ballpoint pens, biros. They were mass produced here for the RAF and the Navy. So that's probably the last interesting place on this part of Headley Road. Next up is a roundabout. Now, of course, roundabouts are a fairly new invention, about 1900 in the UK. Hence, this was originally called Martin's Corner. It's thought this was named after the Martin family who owned land in Woodley in the early 19th century. They're buried in Sonning Churchyard. Now it's called Just Tiles Roundabout. Can you guess why that is? Yes, on the corner, to the left, just out of sight, is Just Tiles. We cross straight over and we go on a little bit on the right-hand side. Before we get to a large green expanse, there's this building on the corner of Halstead Close. Until recently, there was an old building here. It's now replaced by the new cottages, but built in a similar style to the old ones alongside. This one's called Doe Cottage, possibly a baker. What do you think? Next, we come to, as I said, this wide open space on the right-hand side. This is Woodford Park. Woodley's very lucky having this space right in the town centre. A little later, we'll walk right through the park, but for now, we're going to stick to this end of it, nearest the road. This area is called the Memorial Ground. We enter through the Memorial Gates. Gates were originally installed in 2014 as part of the Town Council celebration of the 100th anniversary of World War I. The Duke of York attended the unveiling. They were designed to commemorate the reason for the memorial ground in memory of those who died in this war. The poppies are included because of their association with battlefields, and other items were put in mainly for interest for children to spot. Down the bottom here, you'll find a little squirrel here and an owl or something in the top corner there. The gates were refurbished in 2018, and I understand a metal helmet was added as part of it. The gates were made by a local blacksmith, John Lovelock, at Anvil Forge in Wokingham. Now, this area next to the road, as I said, you come through the gates, which are over there, and this area is the memorial ground. It's originally known as the Village Recreation Ground and opened in 1887 to celebrate Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. On Sunday, the 11th of November 2018, over 2,000 local residents gathered here to commemorate 100 years since the end of World War I and to remember those who'd fallen. Woodley Town Council, St John the Evangelist Church held a commemoration service and were joined by Woodley Army and Air Cadets and the 5th Woodley Scouts. They all marched across the park to this memorial. There are 6 memorial panels here on the right, and they've been added. They give a short history of many of the local servicemen. You find the stories of Sidney J. Smith, who's at Heath Dairy, we'll come there later, and George Pottinger from Garfield Cottage, where we've been just now. We leave the memorial ground past the Oakwood Centre. This is home of Woodley Town Council and also provides rooms to hire for events and business. You'll also find some of the history of Woodley there. And we carry on a little further up Headley Road. On the right is Lone Pine Cottage. This is the former home of Mr. Jesse Nelson, the undertaker, and the wheelwright. Interesting combination of jobs. Also the home of Elizabeth Simmons, the author of the Woodley album, from whom a lot of this history has been taken. On the other side of the road, not quite as pretty as this little place, is the Chequers. This is the original building, which was said to be about 400 years old and had once been a farmhouse. And here's the new one, built in 1964. A little bit different, not quite so interesting. Now, we've been almost round the first loop, so let's just have time to revisit the map and refresh where we started and where we have ended so far. Started here, up there past the church, the school, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle down there, through Cobblers City there, past the airfield site here, all the businesses along there, along here, and to just this very southern part of Woodford Park, which, as you can see, goes right up there. So we're now here opposite the shopping centre, which is just here. But before we go down south, we're going to go up this way, round, back through the park and back down to here again. This is the western loop of the walk up Reading Road. So off we go. We first turn right, the next roundabout up Reading Road, and a little way up is Farriers Close. On the right was the village forge. There, you can see there's a horse waiting there patiently, and it's still there, and much of it looks very much as it did then. That's where Mr. Wadham, the blacksmith, would shoe the horses and put metal tyres on wagon wheels. Directly opposite is a little bungalow called Greyhome. The Tubb family lived here in 1911. Quite a bit has been updated in this case, but you can see some similarities. Then we carry on up Reading Road as far as Western Avenue. Now, Western Avenue, for some reason they've changed the name. It used to be called Mustard Lane. When they built the Great Western Railway, which crosses over between here and the A4 in Sonning, which is where this road went to, the road was cut off, and they weren't going to build lots and lots of bridges for the railway. So this half was rerouted at the end, turn right, join Butts Hill Road, which did have a bridge over the railway, and this was renamed Western Avenue. The northern bit, which is quite short, keeps the old name, Mustard Lane. It's just a little cul-de-sac, and that's where Theresa May lives. You might remember from the map that we walked past here quite a way up Reading Road to see one more place and then retrace our steps. If you're doing a walk, you could obviously skip this extra distance, but if you're doing a Zoom, it's only another minute, so we'll do that. This is Old Bulmershe Court, emphasize old, now known as Bulmershe Manor. And this mysterious little house there behind the wall is reputed to have once belonged to Reading Abbey, to whom a rent of £7, 6 shillings and 8p per year was paid. After the dissolution of the Abbey, Henry VIII offered it to William Grey for £246. That was quite a lot of money in Tudor days. Now, in 1930, there was a talk of demolishing it because it had been derelict and was a favourite haunt of tramps and vagabonds. And it was saved by being bought for £400. 1930, reasonable money. The new owner, Mr. Bard, refurbished and extended it using materials from a large fire-damaged Elizabethan house in Waltham St. Lawrence known as Billingbear. We all have heard of that. His wife Elizabeth, though, was convinced it was haunted, so they never lived there. It was sold again in 1935, including some antique furniture. And there's estate catalogues for these two sales in Reading Central Library. In 2015, it was on the market for £1.2 million. Bit more than 400. By the way, this building, as I said, this is Old Bulmershe Court. It mustn't be confused with another Bulmershe Court. Further to the west, that was a campus of Reading College, and then it was sold for development, and then it burnt down in 2013. Anyhow, we can now turn around, go back down here, back to Western Avenue. So whatever this road is called, we're going to walk up. Now, particularly when you're doing an urban walk, as well as interesting buildings, you should always look out for interesting features. As an aside, many years ago when I was doing several City and Guilds photographic courses, I did one on buildings, and my specialist subject was windows. I took lots of pictures of windows in Reading Town Centre. Sounds boring, but it was actually fascinating. And here, if we just look at 3 random houses up Western Avenue, there's ornate brickwork patterns on some of them, and they're different. It's not as if somebody had come in and built a whole row of houses all the same. They've all got their own unique features. Cross up the top there, diamond up there, all a little bit different. Interesting. That could be something to look at as you're walking up from A to B with nothing else much in between. So we walk up as far in this case as the St. Dominic Savio Catholic Primary School. Junior school was opened in 1966 and the infant school opening in 1974. And luckily for us, there's a little footpath that goes along there around the corner and round the edge of the school, and that takes us to the north end of Woodford Park. As I said, we're going to walk through that, and here we go. So here's a map of the park and the path that we take. We come in up the top here, off the road, down this path here, around the lake, down here, and back out to Headley Road. We came in here, just had a look at the very beginning down here where the memorial gates are. And so there's quite a lot more of it. There's parking over here. So if you wanted to visit, you can either go to the town centre, park there, of course you'll pay that. You can up to here, you can park there. We decided to start at Church Road opposite the pub, or next to the pub, which has got plenty of parking space as well. Anyhow, the park's got a lake and a sports hall, an outdoor tennis court and play parks and an outdoor paddling pool. It's all free for public use during the summer months. There's a state-of-the-art football pitch, and more recently a gym on the park where you have lots of different things. You can try one after the other, get your fitness up. Plenty of parking there. We walk down towards the town centre. On the left, we see, there's a children's playground, and there's the pond as well. Get down a little bit further down, we end up at Coronation Hall. When I went on the walk, I thought it was called Carnation Hall, named after the first condensed milk. No, Coronation. Coronation Hall, right. In 1953, Douglas Bader opened the hall, and this replaced the old army hut, which has served Woodley well as its village hall since 1919, when it had been transported here from Salisbury Plain. And this is now a hall that you can rent space in. And of course, we're now back next to the town centre. So we cross over, walk down between the parade of shops. This is Crockhamwell Road. In 1964, the Wokingham Rural District Council, which is the local authority before Woodley Town Council was created, proposed a development opposite the Chequers pub for 6 shops. And they started work in October 1964, and they added 10 more shops and 2 supermarkets on the other side to be let at an annual rent of £900,000. The first phase was completed in 1965, and the same year, the Woodley and Early Society recommended rerouting Crockhamwell Road to the west, so that this road down here between the shops now became a pedestrian centre. Very sensible. In 1995, Crockhamwell Road Precinct had 6 banks, 1 building society, 3 travel agents, 3 grocers, 2 bakers and a butcher, 2 confectioners, newsagents, tobacconists, 2 florists, 2 shoe shops, 3 women's clothes shops, 2 booksellers, 2 toy cycle and sport shops, and a cafe. In the 21st century, many of the shops are coffee shops and charity shops. And at the very end, if you keep walking, there's a very big Waitrose. And here's an example of the lots of changes you can see since it was created. Maxwells on the left is a well-known hardware shop and many other things. As you can see, it sells plants, lamps, lampshades, haberdashery, pet sundries. And now it's replaced by Robert Dyas. This is on the west side of the shopping precinct. We carry on past all the shops to the end, where we're going to get now go on the last loop of our walk to the west and south of the town centre. We carry on down through the parade into Crockhamwell Road, proper now. You can drive down there, and we see Rose Cottage, site of the original Crockham Well. Aha, it's a clue there. Crockhamwell Road, and some restored cottages. These are just before Foster's Lane. We turn left into Foster's Lane, and almost immediately on the right is Heath Dairy. When it was built, it was called Heath Cottage and run as a small holding in 1818 by Matthew Dully. By 1911, it was inhabited by the Chapman family, who ran it as a dairy. And their daughter, Emily, married Sidney J. Smith, who you might remember was mentioned on the memorial plates in the park. When I was doing my own trip down here to check the route, take photos, I wanted to take a photo, same sort of angle. And this chap came out and gave me a questioning sort of look. And I introduced myself. He's Ivor Smith. And we had a long chat about what I was doing. He was very interested. So we carry on to the end of this road, where we're going to turn left to go up Loddonbridge Road, back into town. But opposite, we'll see the Congregational Chapel, or rather the site of it. It was built in 1834 with seating for 120. Later became the United Reformed Church, and now it's a web design building. A business. It's a bit different from what it used to be. Obviously, things have changed. So we turn left here and back up the road to the Just Tiles roundabout on Headley Road again, but coming up from the south now. We cross straight over this time into Butts Hill Road. And a little way up this road on the left, we turn into Wilmington Close and then into Ash Trees Road. And on the right, we see the barns of Woodley Green Farm. It was then owned by the Pither family. The farm itself was just around the corner on Butts Hill Road, but was demolished in 1983. The barns are all that are left, but at least they're still there. So it just remains for us to retrace our steps back to Butts Hill Road, cross over up to Churchill Road, and we're back at the Bull and Chequers. Now, that wasn't too exhausting, was it? I hope you found that interesting, and I thank you for your company. Full details, as I said at the beginning, can be found on the Woodley Town Council website. Look for history and local walks, and then go down to the page to all the U3A project entries. By the way, nudge, nudge. Woodley Pubs is my other contribution, this time all my own work. Okay, and now a very special thank you for Diana to setting up the Zoom and Stuart for being the MC. Stuart will now sort out any comments or questions you've raised, but since I didn't do the research, I might not be able to answer and help very much, but Diana will give me a copy of the comments, so I may be able to answer you by email later. And if Sheila and Leslie are still with us, they could be unmuted and perhaps answer any tricky questions like that.
Thank you.
Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, we've got, for those of you who want to ask a question, one of the standard ways we can do this is if you find the chat button, you can put your question in writing and I'll bring it to Chris's attention. At the moment then, Bridget has actually popped a little thank you in there, Chris, and in fact, I'm sure that goes for the 46 people that have attended. I was actually amazed. I've been keeping an eye on the numbers and people have been enthralled with your chat, Chris, and been very attentive to the last minute. So that was quite impressive. So people have begun to find their way to the chat button. So do bear in mind, if any future Zoom session you want to raise a low priority question, chat's a brilliant way of doing it, as you can just type away in there. Do be a bit careful though, because very often you might find you're sending a chat to what you think is in fact a particular individual, and it actually ends up going to everybody. Diana asks a little bit of a question. Chris, she says, I'm intrigued by your earlier comment that 1 pub to 10 houses is common. I have to say that caught my attention as well. How come? Were they spending all their time in the pubs at night?
Well, the interesting thing was that I did a project of my own on Wokingham pubs. and found that, for instance, there were about 8 pubs in Rose Street. Now, if you think, how many houses are there in Rose Street? Why do we need 8 pubs? They brought out a new law saying that you could ask your local councillor, effectively, to have permission to sell alcohol from your house. So anybody who fancied making a bit of extra money could do a bit of home brew, open the front door and sell beer. And so they're not pubs necessarily, as we know, great big thing with all sorts of different offers. This was just somebody who could sell, I make beer and give it to my friends, but I can sell it now, yippee. So what classed as a pub was, yes, not necessarily a big one.
Early day microbrewery. I wonder if they got government subsidies. Yes, Bob Jones. Bob Jones expresses his appreciation. Thank you. We have another question about Robert Palmer. Clearly, some people know more about Robert Palmer than others. The question is specifically, what kind of big wig was he?
I can't help you very much with that. I'd have to look him up, I'm afraid, unless anybody can help.
I think he was the local MP at one time.
Oh, yes, I think he was. True.
Yep.
Yes.
Would he have lent his name to Palmer Park?
Indeed, he did.
Oh,
most of these places are named after.
Was he part and parcel of Huntley and Palmer?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a different.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Making too many connections there.
Yeah.
Mary expresses her thanks. Thank you very much. She was absolutely fascinated. And in fact, Carol Hewitt says she's actually definitely tempted to go walk it. Mind you, she does say when travel is allowed. Thank you. She points out your delivery was excellent. Jill, thank you for organising the entire session. Thank you very much. That's Jill Underwood. Oh, and Brian and Leslie Roberts specifically asked, when did the aircraft manufacturers build their engineering buildings in Woodley?
Ooh, I'll have to look that one up, but I'll make a note of it. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. We are, I think we're complete on the outstanding questions. So if you have a question, you may want to just open your microphone and ask away if you prefer.
Or you can send me an email later on.
Oh yes, you can send some really tricky questions in emails and keep Chris in his research.
Could I make a point about the second Bulmershe manor that Chris commented on? In fact, it wasn't Reading College on that site, it was Bulmershe College of Education and then Bulmershe College of Higher Education. Now all erased and now a building site because the college went to the university. But Reading College would have been in Reading, so it was a different college. In fact, it wasn't just the college on that site, there was also a secondary school and a junior school built in the 60s.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Barbara.
Hi, Chris. I last went to the aircraft museum at Woodley probably as long as 10 years ago. Is it still there? It was quite an interesting place to visit when I last went there, but it was a somewhat eclectic collection of interesting things and general junk.
Yes, it's still there. I don't know whether it's open these days, as it were, but certainly it's still there. The title is still just outside the door, sort of thing, you know. And every time we come back that way, we happen to be going down by the way because it's the quickest way home. We think, oh, must go there sometime and have another look. I've been there once, again, about 10 years ago, probably.
If you're interested in those sorts of museums, so Farnborough have a similar type of museum just outside what used to be the main gates. FAST, I think it's called, F-A-S-T. Okay, well, if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to suggest that we thank Chris. Thank you very much. It was well organised, and I enjoyed the detail and the broad scope of your appreciation of Woodley. Next time I shoot through Woodley, I think I'll have to park the car and take a little wander around, pick up on some of these. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for coming.
And